usability and accessibility consultant at MIT, and with Allison Estell, who is right now the learning commons librarian at Simmons, but you're moving on to Wentworth?
Wentworth, like next, well, 2 weeks from now.
Wow.
Yeah, so May 9th. So it'll be a new challenge over there. Very exciting, but it's been wonderful here. So lots of friendly faces.
So I'm going to ask Katherine to start, and Allison will present, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Katherine, and I wanted to just talk a little bit about accessibility, making it usable. Because sometimes, you know, we're all familiar with the WCAG guidelines, or many of us are, and I think they feel a little bit like this maze, like you're standing outside and you know that there's a way to get through the maze, and you know there's another side, but it's really intimidating because there are so many different ways you can go and so many different ways to interpret them. And I feel often when I get to the other side, I couldn't really retrace my steps if I had to, because it's always different and it can feel just really overwhelming, even though they try to make it clear. So I wanted to talk just for a few minutes about the principles at a really high level, because I think if you can think about them that way, it makes it a lot easier to implement them when you're looking at digital information. And one of the things for me, because I come at this from a usability, user experience perspective, is what we're really trying to do is not conform to a guideline, but make it workable for somebody. Because on the other end of that digital information is a person who's trying to find a piece of information, trying to register for something, trying to accomplish a task, and that's what's really important. And if you can keep that in the back of your mind and think about these concepts, I think it makes them a little bit easier to use. So the way that they're structured is there are 4 guiding principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. They spell the word poor, and I really don't know why they chose that. Like, it seems like kind of a poor acronym to me. No pun intended.
You should spell it that way instead of U-O-R.
Yeah, exactly. But it does, it does help you remember them. And where I really concentrate heavily on the first 2, understandable and robust. I feel like understandable is really about usability and clarity and things like that. And robustness has to do with technology and working across platforms. So I almost don't concentrate too much on that, except to say, can I use it on my phone? Can I use it on my desktop? But the first 2, perceivable and operable, are pretty important. As I said, I try to focus on the users, not on the products, not on the checklist. So many people want a checklist or a template, and I feel like accessibility lends itself to that in a very strange way, but you can check off all the boxes and still have a product that doesn't work. You can still have a piece of information that nobody can get to. And as I said, that maze can be really confusing, and if you focus so much on the maze, you kind of lose sight of just getting to the other side. So, I also do a little bit of talking about what kinds of disabilities folks can have if you're talking about who the users are. There's 4 main types: visual, auditory, motor, and cognitive. One of the things that often happens with web accessibility and digital information is that we focus a lot on screen reader accessibility. And I think that that's good in many ways, because a screen reader is a piece of assistive technology, and if you can get that website or that digital information to work with a screen reader, that probably means it's pretty accessible and it's going to work pretty well with other assistive technologies. But sometimes that leads people on the outside to think that we're focusing only on one group of folks with disabilities. Okay, we're only focusing on people with visual disabilities, and they don't realize that that can really be a proxy for all sorts of things. If something is accessible to a screen reader, that means it's keyboard operable, right? So that's going to work for people with motor disabilities who can't use mouse or use some other sort of pointing device. That means it's got pretty good structure probably, it means it uses alt text well, I mean, there's a lot of things, so I see a lot of value in focusing on that. For auditory disabilities, a lot of times what we talk about are captioning, captions for videos. And I'm sure you've all heard more and more about that lately with the big lawsuits with Netflix and other places. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Netflix has a lot of videos up there, right? And people thought, this is great, I can watch Netflix, only a lot of their video wasn't captioned. And a lot of individuals with hearing disabilities said, hey, this is perfect for us, and none of it's captioned, come on. And so I believe there was a lawsuit and there was a settlement, and now most of Netflix's inventory is captioned. And what we kind of found out with that was that captions are great for people who have a hearing disability or have hearing loss. They're also really good for people who are learning English, because you get to hear the words and see the words. It's great for learners because you're getting information in more than one way. It's great if you're in a situation where you can't put your headphones in, you can't turn the audio on, you can watch with captions. So all of a sudden captions have this great side benefit. And you'll see that a lot with accessibility principles. They sort of spill over. Like we thought captions were just for people who had a hearing disability. Well, as it turns out, everybody likes captions. I think with our phones, we saw Siri was really for, now everybody uses Siri, right? But originally, I don't think that's what it was really intended for. And so we've seen a lot of spillover. With motor disabilities, we see a lot of, as I mentioned, folks who can't use a mouse for one reason or another, or use some sort of different pointing device. In terms of accessibility, that means you want to make sure that your site is accessible without a mouse. And that's very easy to check for. Just don't use your mouse. Try to tab through the site, tab through the information, and see if it works. And then something that we don't hear a lot about in terms of accessibility are cognitive disabilities. We're just starting to hear more about making digital information available to people with cognitive disabilities. This is can be things like passwords. How difficult is it sometimes to put in your password when you can't see it or you can't remember what the requirements were for that password? That can be really difficult. White space is really important for people with cognitive disabilities, being able to make sense out of the page, making sure that information doesn't flash or change too rapidly. And so I believe that we'll hear a lot more about how we apply the guidelines to folks with cognitive disabilities as we move forward. I'd also like to mention that we all think about the permanent disabilities that people face, people that for one reason or another have lost their hearing or can't see, have low vision or limited vision and use a screen reader. There are also lots of temporary disabilities. You see people all the time who maybe break their wrist skiing and can't use their mouse and need to use voice recognition software because they can't type. They still have to go back to work and they still have to find a way to get their job done, and that's an important thing to remember. We can all face those sorts of temporary disabilities and need some accommodation for that. There are also a lot of situational disabilities that we don't think about, and I think they're coming, we're hearing more about that now as we see mobile devices, people using tablets and phones outside where it's bright. And if the contrast is really low, they can't see the words or the pictures on the screen. You'll see people in very dark places trying to use their phone or their tablet to get information. People are using these devices all over the place, and we need to think about what those situations are where they're going to be using them, and maybe they need better contrast, bigger fonts, more white space, etc. And so, those are just sort of my high-level accessibility ideas. got some tools and resources here that are helpful for folks, and I'll send these to you on the slide. WebAIM is a group from the Utah State University, and they just, I don't know if you've seen them, Allison, but their resources are really fantastic.
Yes.
They do a lot of interpreting of guidelines for people that's really helpful. They have a tool for assessing accessibility that's very helpful.
Is that Wave?
Wave, the
Yeah.
Wave tool. I love the Wave tool. I've seen the Wave tool go through many iterations.
Oh, how amazing.
And Tenon is a newer tool that's very popular. It's more for, I find it more for developers than everyday folks, but it does work quite well. There's also a color contrast analyzer out there from the Paciello group that's very good, and I'll make sure you have the URLs for those. And also, when evaluating for accessibility, it's really important to use real users and do usability testing with folks, maybe using a screen reader, using screen magnification. So have you done that? Have you had to do that?
For class.
Yeah.
Yep. Wrong times usability class is definitely an important foundation that a lot of my classmates enjoy here, and some of them start their careers there. I actually was on a project with Molly, so.
Oh, really? And did you test with users with disabilities?
Oh, I don't think that of the participants we were able to recruit, that there were any with disabilities, but we did notice a range of behaviors in terms of the abilities that they brought to the testing. So we thought that variety was really fascinating and really important to our results. Do you have anything?
Yeah, no, we didn't, because, I mean, on the surface, they were all, like, freshmen at Simmons, and,
Mhm.
like, there wasn't a lot to distinguish them, but we really had, like, one participant who really, really struggled, and some others who did it really easily, and,
Mhm.
I don't know, like, it was interesting.
Yeah, usability testing is a great learning experience, and it's, when you include people with disabilities or people who use assistive technologies, it just kind of broadens that range. It can be really useful. So I'm a big advocate for that. It's not always easy to do, but it's a great thing to try to include if you can. So I've heard of more companies doing it, and even I think I just heard today of a requirement, I think either in the UK, maybe a settlement where they were saying, yes, you have to comply with these guidelines, and you have to do usability testing along with it, which was really great because they're focusing on what's the real user experience. So that was just my sort of high-level overview. I hope I didn't overwhelm you with too much accessibility stuff. That's it. And if you have questions, you're more than welcome to email me.
I found it really, really interesting and kind of, oh, did you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, can I? Allison's talking, surprise, surprise. No, I found it really interesting and kind of validating too, because I feel like, for me, I was first introduced to this, to things like, issues like accessibility in my job as the Learning Commons librarian. We have a liaison system where many of the librarians, you have a liaison, Linda Schuler, to SLIS, you have a liaison to various academic departments. But one of my roles is more, my liaison roles are more administrative, like admissions or the Learning Center and the Tutoring Center. Hi, how are you? But also I am a liaison to the Office of Disability Services, and in that role I've had the opportunity to confront and problem solve and attempt to problem solve around a lot of different accommodations that people have needed in the library. And it's been a fairly steep learning curve. I mean, there was actually, right around that time, I was having my own health problems that were actually, I was suffering from temporary disabilities. They were, some blurriness over one eye or a limping walk, or inability, people getting frustrated with me for not opening the door quickly enough because it was taking me some time to arrange my things that are just, you kind of, okay, I'm having only the tiniest little awareness that there is a window to even look through into this, but it was kind of like, okay, I could relate to that when I began now confronting with patrons and the accessibility issues that they were facing. and it was like a welcome opportunity to begin some professional self-study on this, because it's not like there was anybody in particular to train me at Simmons so much as somebody to offer me opportunities to train myself or get training from other experts out there. And so what I thought I could talk about today, I mean, a lot of it is just library accessibility in general, but there are web issues, and I thought maybe I could talk about some of the things that we've tried to address at Simmons, but also some of the things I've done to try to learn more about this in case this is helpful, as opposed to coming from like a professional expertise level, more the generalist practitioner trying to figure these things out. One of the first things that I was able to do right after moving into this role was that I had an opportunity to, the library director allowed me to participate in an initiative at my kid's school that was a volunteer. From a parent perspective, I was being a volunteer, but from the library's perspective, it was a kind of professional development. And the program, I don't know if you guys do it at Devotion, the Understanding of Differences.
Yes, I've done it too.
I think it's fantastic. I can't say enough about it.
Yes,
It's with
fantastic.
fourth graders usually. It's like 4 different modules addressing different kinds of, they call them differences as opposed to disabilities, because we talk about low vision or quote-unquote perfect vision, or we talk about hard of hearing or deafness or very able hearing. There's just a spectrum of all these different differences people can have. So motor, I think they're cognitive/learning disabilities is one way they talked about it there, or differences, learning differences. And I mean the main categories.
Yeah, they do 4 weeks.
Yeah, there's 4, and I got to do them all.
Yes.
It was amazing.
And it's really well done.
It's so well done. I mean, I think it's based in Newton, if you're ever wanting to find out more about it. But more than that, the way they do it is that they have a presentation period, then there's a hands-on learning activity for the students. Actually, I think there's 3 or 4 in each module, and then a guest speaker who lives with a difference like this. And so the role that as parents we got to take was presenting the hands-on learning activity. So you're trying to help and engage students. I got to work with a brailler, and I learned how I could do these things. Or there were so many different hands-on activities in each module, but there's all these resources that we were given as the parent volunteer force. And I found being able to engage with, thinking about, it really gets you thinking about what your capabilities are and what other people's capabilities are, the strengths and weaknesses of each way of being in the world. And so it was really great. And I think if you have to present something, even to a group of 94 fourth graders, because we have a huge class of 90 fourth graders, if you can keep them engaged,
Yeah.
then you might know a little bit. Fair enough, it was divided in fourths. It wasn't 90 at a time.
Right. When they get to the guest speaker though, it's all 90 of them at once.
Yes.
And they bring in these fantastic
Yes.
guest speakers. I'm not sure exactly how they find them,
Mhm.
but the kids are so engaged, and the folks who come to speak are really willing to talk about, from a very personal perspective,
Mhm.
what it's like. And the kids can ask any question, and the kids ask fantastic questions, like, I remember one kid said to the woman who had a hearing disability, do you go to the movies? Like, can you go to the movies? What's that like? And, she must have talked for 10 minutes about what that was like going to the movies for her, and what her experience was, and the kids were rapt.
It's so true. And I think getting people, I can't wait to find out what these fourth graders are like how they self-advocate or how they advocate for their peers when they get to college, and when we see them all coming through. And when you see from week to week the knowledge that they had, and they would begin each session, what they noticed in the world. I noticed that curbs are cut and they have little bumpies on them. I noticed some braille on the sidewalk, pushy, to cross the people. They started noticing more in their world than they did before they'd been exposed at all. And I think that started happening to me too. I mean, it happened as soon as I would be, challenged with another patron's challenge. Like, this is something that's challenging for me in the library. How can we solve it? And it helped raise my own awareness. It helped encourage me to learn more and seek out more professional opportunities. Sometimes reading, sometimes going to workshops and things. So I mean, that was kind of the beginning. But I also just want to say that I feel like Perkins, School for the Blind in Watertown, has fabulous professional development opportunities. Some of them are on the level of an introduction to assistive technologies, and you learn a lot about mostly low vision and hard of hearing resources there. But there's a really neat little session in the day where there's some role playing about confronting a patron with a disability, not confronting in an adversarial way, but being confronted with, oh, how do I engage in, if you think in library terms, how reference interview, how do I think of how can I help this person? How do I not let myself be scared to help this person that is here with a cane and I don't know, should I touch her, should I not touch her? I mean, these things, if you start to expose yourself to learning about other people's experiences, you find it everywhere. Then I literally helped a blind person cross the street after this, and there was a construction site that if he had he could have gone into the big hole like the Sesame Street thing. And then when we go around it, there were suds on the ground, and we could have. It was I think an epic street crossing, and it was fabulous because I felt like and then I just love connecting with people. So we had this nice little talk as we're going around. Oh, don't go there. Let me tell you, you won't even believe it. This truck just opened its door. It was just really nice, and I felt that it was just another opportunity I don't know, on a not just professional level, but personal development level. It's just really, I think, when you really contemplate how other people experience the world, I think that's great. The more we know about the varied ways that we all experience things. So anyway, Perkins, they have also things more librarian-ish about Massachusetts, these grants that you can get for usually assistive, they're usually for materials, or is it, there's ones for like fixtures, like actual construction things, and then there's ones for adaptations that you can get that are more about the equipment or the services. And it's very particular. You have to have a library strategic plan already on file with them well before you start the process. But they work you through this whole grant process for this. And so if you're in a library that needs to rehabilitate itself around accessibility issues, there are grants for this, and you just get your ducks in a row with your strategic plan, and you could attend one of these grant workshops. Shelley Pizzata, a professor here, she was the one giving some of the talk about that as well, in her role in the grant process. I look for websites, of course, the WebAIM and all those things, but also if you go on the Massachusetts governmental website, you can find your way through to their accessibility standards, through their kind of it's like through their tools and policies and things like that. You gradually make your way to accessibility standards. If you follow other listservs that have a lot of public librarians on them, they might be saying, what is this section of 508? Section 508, how do I become section 508 compliant? Where's the section 508 checklist? What is section 508? So it's labor law, basically, US labor law, and it's governing, trying to make these things accessible. And again, it's not really a checklist kind of thing.
It applies to certain, so Section 508 applies to anyone who gets government money for something. So if the federal government federal government dollars are going to buy something, like a piece of software, it has to be accessible. What that means in practice is highly variable. And it's very vendor specific. The vendor can say, oh yeah, it's accessible, but you really won't know until you try it. And I think to your point in putting yourself in the user's position, I noticed that you have on a Mac over there, and I don't know if you know this, but on the Mac there are accessibility features. They're built in with every single Mac. You can go there, you can turn on a screen reader, has a built-in screen reader, and you can try it and see what it's like to listen to have everything on the screen read to you from top to bottom, and what it's like to try to parse that.
Yes, it's so true. I mean, I think the woman at the Perkins workshop, she was talking about how her iPhone is basically her portable assistive technology for almost everything, including to make sure that what she's wearing matches, because she's living with low vision, and she was talking about all these wonderful resources, and she and I together used a screen reader to look at our group study room's booking page, which is just awful. The poor man in JAWS was just like, he couldn't And this is a problem where the reason I wanted to look at that page with her and just see what was happening is because we know we have a patron with poor vision, and she cannot book her own study rooms because there's just no way, and she had come to the desk a couple times wanting to book a group study room for her class, for her people, and we would book it for her, and knowing that we also, in times of tight budgets and so on, there's nothing we can do about it right now. We can't change it, we can't get something new right now, although there are ideas on the horizon. And so sometimes the solution is not fix the thing, but, fix the object, but fix like the policy or procedure. So what we did is we actually made sure that all of our library staff, including student workers, have privileges that are elevated in the group study room booking system so that they may book on anyone's behalf. So that it's not just like, ooh, this one time, this person, let me pretend and tell me what your password is and I'll put it in. We don't have to do that anymore. So at least we can just provide the same service to anyone. It might be that, maybe it's a temporary disability, or maybe it's just we have time to provide this extra level of customer service to you today. But either way, sometimes it ends up being a customer service solution, but that's something that we can do right now. But also cringe and knowing how terrible it is in terms of the accessibility. A lot of the time we become aware of the accessibility issues because a specific patron lets us know. There's somebody, a wheelchair user says, I can't see the buttons on the MFDs, the printer scanners in the library because they're all at, how do you see what they are when they're at your eye level? And so it doesn't even matter if it would be accessible once you could see it, but it's not accessible to her. And so getting to figure out how you make something like this happen around campus, we collaborated with the disability services and also facilities, and they made us a really cool low platform for a tiny desktop printer that was way higher than her, and lowered down, and now we actually have something where you're sitting in a standard wheelchair height and you can actually see the buttons and operate this printer yourself. These little things like this, I feel like there's a lot of things around the gap. There's the big checklist of things, there's having your whole website redesigned and having it be awful when it's done and having it be worse than it was before, and then having the college need to now pay to redo the entire website all over again. Gus and Julie are colleagues of mine in the library, so it's wonderful. You're all wonderful. But Gus and Julia and I are on like a website redesign committee now where we're trying to make sure that we pull everything together for functionality, just quite frankly, for even the most able, superpowered person you could imagine would be frustrated by our website. But
Just tell us what we need to do.
I know, but I think it's great to see both of you here because I think you bring up universal design helps everybody.
Yep.
I mean, we all have times where we are, there's bonuses and everything.
I love your printer example because I actually know of a situation where a lot of times people don't want to use, they don't want to use the printer that's labeled with the wheelchair sign, right? I want to be able to choose what I can use. I don't need you to tell me. I want you to make something available. So I know of a situation where they put two printers side by side. One is up.
Like water fountains.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the example. And one is down, just like you described it. And over time, what they saw is that everybody's using the lower one because everybody can see it. It's so much easier to see the buttons on the screen. The higher one, because of the glare or whatever,
The waves
is
of light.
much harder to see. And we had assumed that the lower one would be for the people who were sitting in chairs or were using, some sort of assistive device. And actually, almost everyone is using the lower one because it's just that much easier to use.
That's so awesome.
And we never would have, if you had put a separate one aside just for certain folks, it wouldn't have worked out that way. Also, your point about your colleague at, was it Perkins or in the libraries who uses the iPhone?
Oh, she was saying it's fantastic.
So that's a great example. When the iPod first came out, people who were blind thought, what a fantastic device for us. You can get books on there, you can get music on there, this is great. And then they saw it, and it had one button that was a dial,
Oh,
with
yeah.
nothing marked on it, and it was a disaster. You know, they were like, this would be perfect. You know, and people with disabilities spend hundreds and thousands of dollars on assistive technology. It's very expensive, it's very temperamental, it's heavy, you know, they need multiple devices, and they thought the iPod would be great. Well, it didn't work out that way, and, you know, I believe there was a lawsuit with the upgraded iPod. People were thrilled, because it meant that, you know, if I had a vision problem, ordinarily I would have to buy 3 or 4 devices that would be very expensive. They would come to, I'd have to have somebody set it up for me, and somebody help me use it. They could order an iPhone and get it just like you did, delivered to their house, take it out of the box, turn it on, and use it, just like everybody else. And it has special features that they need to turn on, but it has been a game changer in terms of directions and everything, money recognition.
She was very fashionable. Her outfit matched beautifully with her.
Yeah, I
everything that she
mean,
did.
just the things that you can do with the iPhone. I was at CSUN, and people want to use it even for getting around inside of buildings, right? Because you'll see a lot of folks use their iPhone for directions to get to a building, and then they get inside, and there's no wayfinding.
Oh, yeah.
What do you do? You're inside the building, I'm lost.
It's true.
And so people are able to use it inside buildings now to actually find direction. But, you know, it's a device that replaced so many others, and it made people different. And now everybody can use the same device. Now, lots of people with vision disabilities hook up Braille displays to it. You can hook up all sorts of assistive technology to it. But
it's this thing that's familiar to everybody.
right.
And I think you bring up a point, like, people with these disabilities need to buy these assistive technologies just to be in the world the way that I bring my inhaler around or something like this. It's light as in my bag. But just to experience the world, just to feel comfortable or whatever. And so we as librarians, we aren't necessarily the ones that need to provide all the technologies, but we need to kind of have some familiarity about how we're going to interface with them. And so like an iPhone is great because we all kind of know how roughly to use it. Now I do. When I first started, I got a smartphone. When I started library school, I got a Mac because I'd always been a PC person, and I hadn't the faintest idea. I did not think it was intuitive at first. Now I get it. But like, imagine when a couple months into my job, when I'm on the phone with somebody trying to talk them through how to do something, and they were on a Mac, and if I hadn't had a Mac, I wouldn't have had the faintest idea what you call the command button, or I almost don't remember what they're called on a PC anymore, which is great because they're still intuitive in the back of my mind. But the more technology we know how to use, the better we can help other people who are bringing what they're bringing there. And I think that that's something that we've also, that's always a challenge in the library too, is like, what are they bringing, but what are they expecting us, especially in an academic library, to provide as opposed to a public library? And how do you make certain referrals, and where are those referrals? Is it the Massachusetts Commission for the Blind or for Deaf and Hard of Hearing? Is it getting something that could be as simple, and what I'm rooting for is an institutional membership to the Perkins Library, because through that there are a lot of like audio, like book readers and things that Simmons would be able to have on hand that library students could confront and understand and get to know before they go out to the libraries, that our patrons could use, and they can always register for their own as well, and get the audio books and get these other resources. Again, Perkins tends to be focusing, I don't mean to sound overly vision disability biased, but it's just an example that we can extrapolate out. The more things we know that we're comfortable with or familiar with, the more we can help when people, oh, well, if you have this kind of equipment and I have this kind of system here, if there's maybe we can make some sort of crosswalk between them if you understand how they work. And because I think that the web accessibility, I mean, it matters for the website, it matters for our databases, it matters, like, are our vendors making things web accessible? It matters for services like course reserves. We don't do electronic reserves per se anymore at Simmons. We use our articles in the databases and so on, but it matters when we have print materials, and someone does have a vision issue, and how do we work together to make sure how can a print material be screen read, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And how you scan that, and it comes down to resourcing. Who's going to scan that? Is it the library? Is it the Office of Disability Services? who's going to buy the magnifying glass that we can't replace the magnifying glass that went missing a couple of years ago because it's not in the library budget, and it's not really in the Office of Disability Services budget either, and, you know, it was a nice thing to have for people. It wasn't always, these things, you know, magnifiers, these don't have to just be for people with low vision. It can be because there's tiny marginalia in some really cool document you're looking at. And so therefore, it's really not, why should the Office of Disability Services pay for this anyway? Because we can all benefit from it. And so I guess that's the other thing I'm grappling with is not just where to go to learn about these things, but then how to get these things done with tight budgets. And what you and I were talking about earlier is you can't prepare for every single, I want to prepare for every single circumstance in advance. But some of it comes down to just being approachable enough that patrons feel like they can come to you and that their feedback is received really well, and that you can try to be as prompt and responsive as you can. But, I mean, Gretel, do you want to share what you were telling me before about Canopy, our streaming media? This is just really great. I love this. They're streaming video resources that we have
Yeah,
here.
so it's a new database that we have at Simmons, and it streams a lot of different media that can be used as teaching tools. And so I was doing a book display for National Poetry Month, and I wanted to feature a couple of videos of slam poetry. And so I found one that actually featured a deaf slam poet from Israel who like befriended this Palestinian poet. So that was really cool, and it came captioned. And then there was another one that I wanted, but it wasn't captioned, but I noticed at the top right on the screen, it gives you this option, like, do you want this caption? Send us a note at Canopy about why, and they'll get it done. And so within a week, the video was captioned and sent back to us and ready to go. And so I thought that was like a really great turnaround time. I thought it was really responsive. I thought it was great the way they were like, hey, we're trying to get this all captioned. We can't do it all. But if you let us know that you want this, we'll make it a priority and get it done. And I didn't expect it to be done so quickly. And
That's
who knows if
fantastic.
anybody will use it, but I liked that that possibility existed. So
Yeah.
if somebody's like doing research for a class and wants to watch this video but can't hear it, they can email them and know that like in the time of getting an interlibrary loan, they'll get the captions on the video done. So.
That's great.
Something that I also like about Canopy is, as a frequent user of captions for myself, is that they don't just have it embedded on the video, they have it on the side so that you can highlight it and manipulate it, and it's also, they highlight the section that's currently being spoken. So it's really interactive, and you can follow along and go back to earlier spots very easily. They're
cool.
They're fantastic, I really love
So I think there is such a difference between like just doing captioning and doing quality captioning. Because if you turn on any just generic YouTube video, I challenge you to turn the sound off and try and watch it with the captions that are built in. They're like incomprehensible.
Yeah, the auto caption has gotten better, and it's pretty good if the speaker speaks perfect, unaccented, slow English. But anything else, and you know, any sort of regional accent, you're hopeless. And I finally figured out how to tell the difference between auto caption videos and caption videos, because for a long time, you just had to watch it for a few minutes and then say, oh, these are terrible, they must be auto captioned. So now they have some marking on the side that indicates that it's auto captioned. And a lot of it, you know, you're right, you need quality captions. You need captions that indicate when there's sort of a sound that's important to the action.
And I like the idea of it matching up also, like with what they're saying and what the text is, because like I live with a woman who's profoundly hard of hearing and watch a lot of closed captioning television, and when it's live, it's like really, you know, what I'm hearing and understanding is like on, you know,
Versus what
like
they're-
way ahead of what she's hearing and understanding based on what she's
Right.
watching.
And
It's
the
a different
other-
aesthetic experience entirely.
Yeah,
it is a completely different experience, but I love the caption videos also, you know, video's not searchable on its own. The captions are files that are searchable. So if you have captioned video and you wanna search for that poet, you know, that particular
In
kind
a
of poetry,
2-hour session, where did this one?
it's
Right.
gonna find it for you. Otherwise, you've gotta watch the whole thing. And that's a big benefit, you know, across a whole bunch of fields. And I think, you know, we've missed out on that. There's also a move to get the captions to appear in different ways. Like some people need the captions to be bigger. Sometimes they want them to be at the top rather than at the bottom. They want them to be a different contrast. And some viewers will allow you to adjust that, which is really nice because, you know, ultimately, we all want control over what we're seeing and doing. We don't want it just delivered to us. It's like choosing the printer. Like, I would like to choose what printer I'm going to use. I don't want you to make me do it. I want to have some choice, and I want to control it. And now we're seeing more and more control given to the user with these options. It's really nice.
I also kind of wanted to give some recognition to a Simmons professor. I hope it's okay to say this on the web of another person. She didn't sign a release, but she's not here. Jennifer Edge Savage is in the School of Education, and she did a fantastic, let me see if I can see what it was called. She did a little workshop about a month ago called Assistive Technology and Universal Design for Learning, Tools and Strategies to Benefit All Students. And what I thought was great, it was extremely well attended, which was one of the best things, aside from how great it was that it was so well attended, so many people got the benefit of hearing. She basically teaches people how to be special education teachers and how people confront, well, wait a minute, so I guess I need to know what are some of the special needs students might have. And then I have to not just tell my students how to do that, but some of my students might have these needs that I'm teaching them about that they already know about. And she pointed out, like Apple, Google is trying, maybe not in YouTube yet, but in Gmail and things like that, there's a lot of really wonderful built-in things that we don't even, if we haven't tested the waters yet, they're already there. I think there's a voice-to-text function in Google Drive, and all sorts of things that could be really useful for productivity for anyone, and a lot of really great things like that. And so there are resources, even in if you're in an academic institution, there are resources that aren't in the library, that aren't in the computer science departments sometimes, where these fields, the people who are thinking about these things as well. And I was really pleased to find out that there was such a font of knowledge in our education department as well, and that she's spreading the word. The Center for Excellence in Teaching also had a workshop that I actually had to leave because of an accessibility emergency. Patron privacy. But the point is, I did have to leave. We had a kind of an urgent thing involving maybe the tour. I'm not going to say. It might have been SLIS, it might not have been. Anyway, what I had just been hearing was from a professor who had taught the Simmons course, that the first year students coming in, and she'd had all these wonderful or the at Boston, or whatever they're calling them, when you go out in the world and you have to experience Boston. And she'd set up all this beautiful syllabus and everything, and all these learning activities, and really hands-on, and then got in the room and realized that she had someone with low vision, someone who was hard of hearing, someone on the autism spectrum, someone else in a wheelchair, although temporarily, and someone else she had the whole spectrum of both permanent and temporary and situational, and across all the different types of differences that people can have. And all of a sudden, what am I going to do for what's my scavenger hunt going to be like? And she reworked it. She wanted people to steer their way to a certain corner and listen for like the geese or whatever. And she went with this full multi-sensory scavenger hunt, and it sounded like everyone just really thought this was just fantastic and wonderful. And everybody could experience at least part of it, and many people could experience multiple parts of it, and it was just one of these things that really enhanced and enriched her class for herself and for everybody else. And so, I know we're way off of web accessibility at this point, but I think I like to work by analogy anyway. So, here's some analogies. You take these kinds of experiences that people have, and wouldn't it be great if we could make our website this way the next time around, or comb through some of these things that we're a little nervous about. But I would want to ask you, how we try to think about these things, but almost like where to begin.
Well, that's a really good question. We always do better if we think about accessibility from the beginning. It's much harder to go back at the end. Your website is done, and you want to do an audit and see if it's accessible. and you find out there's a problem, it's really expensive to go back and rework it. It's much better to start out at the beginning and say, oh, we're gonna have a lot of video on this website. What's our process for getting captioned video up on the site? You know, how are we gonna do that? Or we wanna make sure that, you know, it's gonna be screen reader accessible. It's really important. And so are we gonna look at code snippets? You know, are we gonna look as we go along and make sure we're on the right track? Are we gonna look at what we're designing or developing it in to make sure that that platform is accessible? Because you can't plan for every contingency, but you can make sure that the hooks are there for assistive technology to grab onto. And if you can think about it from the beginning, from that universal design perspective, you know, how are people gonna get this information? Is it auditory, is it visual? What are they gonna have to do on the website? Forms are another big thing. People have to fill in forms. They really have to be coded correctly so that everybody can access them, whether they have a cognitive disability, you know, so the labels are associated properly with the form fields, or from a screen reader perspective so that they're read in the right order. And if you can think about that from the beginning, it makes it so much easier moving forward. So that's the best thing I can think of, is
Whenever possible, try to start at the beginning. Yeah. I mean, like, so when you're acquiring some new platform or system or resource, trying to add, I mean, maybe you don't know what the right questions are to ask, but if you say, what are you doing around accessibility? Can you tell us a little bit about how you're trying to make this universally accessible? And hearing what they have to say, maybe if they say, you know.
right. I mean, sometimes you'll have people say,
Nothing.
oh, we hadn't really thought about it. You know, if they're being honest, they'll say we haven't really thought about it. Vendors often do something called a VPAT, a voluntary product accessibility template. And this is something that they fill out. It's to comply with Section 508, and it's something that they complete. And some companies, you know, do a really good job at it. I mean, my understanding is that companies like IBM will really go the extra mile and say, well, this product is pretty much accessible, but here are the issues that we have, right? These are the stumbling blocks we run into. And other folks just say, oh yeah, it works great.
All the ways we've tested it.
And so sometimes you just have to say, like, oh, how did you test that? How did you, you know, can we test it out? Can we take a look at it? And that is one way to do it. I also wanted to mention as a resource for you, another great resource is the Carroll Center for the Blind and Mute. And they do, my recollection is they do an assistive technology day, I want to say in the spring or the fall, where they just have all sorts of assistive technologies out for folks to look at.
It's true.
And it's really so nice to see and to have a chance to look at these things and see what they're all about. They do a lot of library resources, you know, how folks can get books on tape, audiobooks, where those are available from.
It's true. I couldn't believe the difference between the screen magnifier. We got to look at a lot of things in these Perkins workshops as well. They give you a lot of hands-on time as well. And they were beautiful. And the amount of color contrast options you had, and all these choices, and screen reader built in or not. And they had, like, it was almost like a showroom for multiple things.
Yeah.
They really had a variety. And then you come back to our little press this button, and there's a one dial, but you can't even hook it up to a nicer monitor because the cord that would do so would probably cost more than the new monitor, if it even exists. But it's wonderful that there are these resources right here. And I think that Perkins at least, and probably, like, they want to do consulting. They want to get out there. Outreach is so important to that. I mean, Perkins has done consultation with MIT and Harvard for their websites to make sure. They've mentioned MIT, I guess, if Perkins gets sued.
I'm
No.
not here.
No, it's true. We're not these are personal opinions that we're expressing here. But the reality is that institutions that have wanted very much to make their websites better have consulted with Perkins, and it's been a really, from what I understand, successful partnership.
Yeah, the Carroll Center, I know, also does consulting. So if you find yourself in a position where you need to have something evaluated, you know, that is a resource for, they do that sort of work. I've seen their presentations, they're very helpful, so.
Yeah, it is, and I will say that, like, it's much better if you can seem approachable and have people who want to come forward and tell you what you can do to help. It's unfortunate the way our society is set up, that sometimes it takes a lawsuit to get things rolling, but it moves things along, whether it's here or in copyright issues or other things. It moves our knowledge along, raises our awareness. But my big thing is to try, I guess it's coming from a customer service standpoint, is just wanting to seem approachable enough that people feel that they can come to you and let you know what you can do to make their experience better, no matter who they are or what kinds of differences they're living with. And so, I mean, I even feel bad that we don't have a door opener now in restricted access. So we have to have a sign that if you can't open the door, you have to knock and we'll come let you in. But, like, you know, when they renovated the building, it just didn't get in, and those are very expensive apparently to retrofit or something. And then again, who's going to pay for them?
Right, but that is the idea of doing it after the fact is so much more expensive.
It probably would have been much easier if they could have done that back 9, 10 years ago. But having the sensitivity when you try to just put on different lenses, so to speak, or like ear horn, to whatever you're experiencing.
Yeah, because for me, it always comes back to the user's experience, and we all want to just get something done, right? I'm not going to the library to, like, give you a hard time about what you don't have. I just really need to get what I need.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're willing to help me get what I need, great, you know, and then I'll work with you.
Exactly. And if you tell me what you need,
Right.
I want to help you get it.
Right.
So, exactly.
Right, so that's really important. Did I see a question?
Yeah, so this is really fantastic because I've had some units in my classes at SLIS about accessibility, usually in terms of, you know, what it means generally to have an accessible website. And I know that in the most recent versions of HTML, HTML5 and CSS, well, probably just more on the HTML side, like there are specific tags you can use that are accessible and act as those kind of grabbing hooks for those assistive technologies. And then I'm thinking also of the way, the other pressure on developers and designers to have dynamic, interactive content that looks and feels a certain way, in a way that's probably not anticipating or proactively accounting for users with differences in how they're approaching it. So I was wondering if you've interacted with developers or people who are responsible for website decisions at any of the places you've consulted with, or you know, can comment on any of your communication with them and their willingness to look at their best practices or what websites they take care of.
Yeah, I have interacted with a fair number of developers, and again, you know, they want to do the right thing typically.
Yeah.
They're, you know, a lot of them just sort of like, I'm not familiar with that. Can you point me in the right direction? Can you show me how to do it? And one of the key things we talk about is separating presentation from content. That's pretty important. So, you know, it's fine to rely on CSS to make your site beautiful, but you want to be able to turn CSS off and still get the same content. You know, that's pretty important. Let me think about what else I was going to say about that. You know, there are, one thing, you know, from my perspective is you don't want to say that every website has to be static HTML, white text on black background, really boring, no pictures, because that's not what anybody wants, right? And the dynamic websites, they do present a challenge, but it can be done. There are ways to use things like ARIA, which is an application-rich, I can't remember what the acronym stands for exactly, but it's a markup that's very helpful in letting the user know. What you want to let the user know is that something on the page has changed. And, oh, it's right here. because there's nothing more frustrating than these pop-ups. You know, if I'm a screen reader user and I'm marching through the page, and I get down here, and there's a pop-up, and it pops up here, and it's something really important, but I can't see it because I'm down here, right? My screen reader's not gonna tell me that and switch the focus up here and say, hey, there's a big pop-up here. You need to take a look at this. You wanna make sure that they can see that, or if it's not important, that it's coded so that it'll say, hey, screen reader user, you can ignore this. This is meaningless, you know? Just go ahead and skip it. And there are some things, there's also variability in what users like. I know some screen reader users, like I personally hate the endless scrolling page, right? That was popular a couple of years ago. I don't know if it's still that popular, but you know how you would get to these news sites and it would just go on and on and on, and you're like, where is the end? And one of my friends who's a screen reader user said, oh, I love those pages because nothing has to reload, right? It's all there. And I can look at all the headings and find what I want. Whereas if I have to move through pages, I have to go to the next page, have it load, have it read to me, go to the next page, have it load, have it read to me. Now that was his preference. I could see another screen reader saying, you know, I find the endless scrolling tedious too.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to kind of test with users and see what they like. But the idea of separating presentation and content so that you're not using color, you know, these sort of basic guidelines, but that doesn't mean the site has to be boring, not interactive, not cutting edge. It can be very innovative, but you just have to say to the developers, well, how would we get around, you know, how would we think about this? And can we do a little snippet of code and test it? And that's where things like, are you familiar with the agile development process?
A little bit.
Okay, so it's very popular now where you are developing as you're going. You're not doing the, let's develop the whole website, get to the end, and then take a look at it and see if it works.
Yeah.
You know, let's develop something that works. It'll only be a piece of what we're looking at, but let's do it. And then we can look at that, and if that's not what we want, we'll just, the next round, we'll redo it and do it again. And this kind of works well for accessibility because you can say, oh yeah, we did that little snippet. It isn't quite what we want. It doesn't really work with a screen reader, or it doesn't doesn't scale well when somebody magnifies the page. Let's rethink that and go back. And it's not costing you anything because you're not redoing your entire website, right? So does that help answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's great.
Are there any other questions?
Could you just talk a little bit about the work that you do and how you got into this work, sort of looking at accessibility and assistive tech?
So I came from a communications background. You know, I did a lot of health communications. I worked for government contractors, actually before there was the web. And then
Yes.
there was this
It
wonderful.
was there before there was
Yeah.
a web too.
And then there was this thing called the web, and we didn't have to print things anymore. We could put them on the web, and everybody could get them, and everything would be free. And it wouldn't cost anyone anything. Remember that?
And when I got my first email as a grown adult.
And I had a background in social work, working with older adults, and so it sort of fit nicely with health communication. You know, you're communicating with people who may have a language barrier, may have all sorts of barriers to getting information. So I was always thinking about those different sorts of groups, and then I got into usability, and that was a really nice fit with accessibility. So I'm here solely representing my personal views, but my day job, I do usability and accessibility consulting at MIT. I'm an internal consultant. So I look at different projects there, web projects, and then I teach at Northeastern in their technical communications program. And I teach information architecture, and I'll tell you, I always give a shout out to the librarians who were the first information architects organizing all this information. And I teach web accessibility as well. So that's just sort of, everybody gets to usability from a different place, it seems like. And that was my group was communications, health communications specifically.
Thank you. Allison, could you talk a little bit about your role as the liaison of the Office of Disability What does that entail?
Well, basically, sometimes we will work together to identify things that we think need to get done, but most often it's motivated by students. If someone comes to us in the library and asks for some sort of specific accommodation to meet their needs, the first thing I'm supposed to do is make sure that the Office of Disability Services is involved. I mean, it's hard because I'm sure they could even use more resources as well, but we're trying to make sure that there's some sort of ability to triage for the most urgent needs and so on, and that we're letting the Mass Commission for the Blind or the Mass Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing play the role that they can play, so that we can play the roles that only we can play, even though we might be able to also offer certain things, like trying to make sure that we are triaging and delegating appropriately to what kinds of needs people have. I mean, on a practical level, a lot of it has to do with, this student needs to, can't experience the course reserves in this way because they're in a print book and she needs them electronically. And so we work together, and yes, you may come out and check them out for a long time and go scan them yourself, so that, because we don't have the ability to scan them. We don't have the bandwidth, let's put it that way, to do that, and so we might be arranging for extra long checkout periods, so the Office of Disabilities can send someone over to come check something out and scan it and get it formatted for the appropriate, whatever the technology is that their student is going to be using. But it also might be, or things like the printer that come up, or other things that are not really about web accessibility, but like there's mobility issues, like especially in Boston in the winter, being a wheelchair user is pretty awful, I would imagine. There aren't curb cuts where you want them to be, and even if there are, there's a huge puddle in front of it, and if it's not a puddle, it's a big ice pond. So if you live on the residence campus, you may not want to just come over and see if that book you wanted on reserve might happen to be available. But of course, so we make accommodations like that, like yes, you may call in advance and see if it's there, and if it is there, check it out now, and it won't be overdue by the time you get here. And yes, we'll let you get more than one, maybe. I mean, we've done things like this, more, made accommodations that make sense. I rely on the Office of Disability Services to verify and credential the students who are entitled to accommodations. That's another reason. It's not just, to make sure that our resources, some things that are good for a person with differences would be great for all of us. I would also like to call ahead and see if that book is on reserve, is available for me on reserve. And can I just get 5 anyway, because I'm only going to photocopy less than 10% or or one chapter. Copyright law is very important also. That's another talk. A lot of these things would be really beneficial to lots of students, but making sure that we are sharing the resources fairly and according to need. So we have to work together to make sure that we're helping each patron to have a similarly not challenge-free, but under-challenged experience at the library. We want it to be as smooth as possible for everybody, and making sure that we do that. There's like the to-do list and then the wish list. The wish list would be more things like really thinking about what enhancements could make this a more hospitable and welcoming place, literally, physically, but also on the web. What kinds of resources could we as an institution already have on the ground here? What kinds of resources and services could already be in place so that it's already accessible and welcoming to even more people than it is right now? And that would be kind of the planning kind of stage that we haven't been able to claw our way into at this point. I mean, we've got all these wonderful new undergraduates coming, and we're just trying to keep up with the pace of our wonderful enrollments that we have this year. But that would be on a wish list. Is really trying to be as proactive as you can be. You can't prepare for everything, but there's some really nice to have that would help a lot of people, and that would be something that would be done in conjunction with the Office of Disabilities Services. If we filed one of these grants for assistive technology with Massachusetts, with the state, that would be something that you would see. The library would get their strategic plan on file, and then I would see, since it won't be me, I would see my opposite of predecessor. Thank you. My successor, thank you, Julie. Working closely with him to make sure that we are pooling all of our knowledge, the library-based things and the accessibility expertise together. And they're great to work with. So I've learned a lot from them as well.
I think it's an interesting challenge of academic universities, the relationship between the Office of Disability Services and administrations and libraries. And I wonder how that exists in other places
Yeah.
as well, because it's like incumbent on the student to take responsibility for whatever accommodation
Really
they
is.
need. Like every semester for every single course that they have to do. Like it's a lot of work. And then like on the disability site, they're like, and we know that you need these accommodations, and make sure to plan this way in advance, because we're way too busy and we're not sure when we're gonna be able to get you
It's
in for this
terrible.
appointment. And so I think it's really interesting to think about those different things and how really incumbent it is on the student to come up with a lot of these technologies, which is why sometimes I feel like the very least we can do is have like a basic understanding of how to use that. Because like nobody wants to come in and use the 1985 CCTV machine on display at the reference desk.
On display
like,
and never use it. It's true.
basically.
I mean, but I
Or
teach
put
everybody
the
how to use it.
Mayfield on display on their
Yeah, I
reference
know.
desk. Yeah, totally a handy piece of equipment, I
Yeah.
think, still, like if you need something, like have something, but.
Well, I'll tell you, I have a cousin, it's the last thing I'm gonna say, I have a cousin who's much older than I am, and she was born blind, and my aunt insisted that she was mainstreamed through school, which was a huge battle every year, getting her through school. And, my aunt learned to actually sight read Braille, that's how dedicated she was to making this happen. And my cousin got into Georgetown, and, she was gonna go to college, and it was completely incumbent on her. I mean, there was no ADA, there was no disability services, you were on your own, and her mother had to transcribe everything for her so that she could, read it. And she would go, she had a nifty tape recorder that I thought was very cool, this big thing, and she would go to professors at the beginning of class and say, can I tape record your lecture? And oftentimes they would say no. Because those were the days when they thought tape recorded lectures would end school as it existed, right? Because this is proprietary information. You'll have to get the notes from somebody and have your mother transcribe them so that you can then catch up. And when I think about how much has changed in that time, that's amazing.
And also sometimes what hasn't, there's just a story in the New York Times about students who cannot get around the Columbia campus, cannot take certain classes because of how many different buildings and back ways and entrances they have to go through, makes it completely unreasonable for them to be able to get across campus, so.
That's true, how much has not changed.
And I think in libraries also, so ABA came out in 1990, and it wasn't until 2001, after a controversial decision, that an ALA committee passed a statement about improving accessibility in libraries, which is astounding. That takes so long.
But it's amazing the things the lengths that people would go to self-advocate and it's astounding to me. And as a kid, I thought this was just the way it was. I was like, well, yeah, doesn't everybody learn how to read Braille? And they're like, no, it's really hard. It's not what people do. So,
Well, thank you both. This has been such a great time to hear you both do different perspectives.
Thank you.
We have a gift. Excuse me.
Aw.